Looking back, I should have known that divorcing my wife wouldn't be the end of my problems. I thought my quiet life as a beekeeper in Nebraska was finally peaceful until SHE moved 3 houses down with her new real man husband. What started as destroyed flower beds escalated into total war against my livelihood. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated what happens when you corner a man who has nothing left to lose. By the time I was done, they wished they'd never heard of Winston Wolfe. I'm 52 years old, and I've been keeping bees for the better part of a decade now. Started as a hobby after my divorce from Brittany, but it turned into something more, a way to heal, I guess. There's something about working with those little ladies, watching them build their perfect world, that puts a man's soul at ease. My backyard became my sanctuary in Cedar Falls, Nebraska. 12 wooden hives arranged in neat rows, surrounded by wildflower meadows I planted specifically for my girls. Lavender, sunflowers, clover, everything a bee could want. The honey business was good to me. Local farmers markets, a few specialty stores in town, even had a contract with Henderson's Diner for their famous honey wheat rolls. My property wasn't much to look at from the street, just a modest ranch house on Maple Avenue with faded blue shutters. But step into the backyard, and it was like entering another world. The hives hummed with life, flowers swayed in the Nebraska breeze, and I'd build a small workshop where I processed the honey. Had a little white picket fence around the whole operation to keep curious neighbors from getting too close to the hives. After Brittany cleaned me out in the divorce 3 years ago, this place became everything to me. She got in the big house, the fancy car, half my savings, claimed I was emotionally unavailable, and obsessed with bugs. Maybe she was right about the emotional part, but those bugs were feeding me now, giving me purpose. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly retirees and young families. Mrs. Patterson next door grew prize-winning roses, and old Mr. Chin across the street spent his mornings doing Tai Chi. Kids would bike past on summer evenings, and I'd wave from my porch swing with a cold beer and the satisfaction of another day's work done. I thought I'd found my forever home. Thought the worst was behind me. Then came that Tuesday morning in late spring when I saw the moving truck 3 houses down. I was out checking the hives, listening to my girls preparing for their morning flights, when I heard a familiar laugh that made my blood run cold. Brittany. She stepped out of a silver SUV, flipping that blonde hair the way she always did when she wanted attention. Behind her came a mountain of a man. Had to be 6'4", built like a linebacker, with arms covered in tattoos. This was Brad, apparently, the real man she'd left me for. Brad's pickup truck was one of those compensating machines, lifted so high you'd need a ladder to get in, chrome exhaust pipes, and a horn that probably woke folks 2 counties over. As I watched them unload boxes, Brittany's eyes found mine across the yards. She didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me at all, just smiled that cold smile I remembered too well, and whispered something to Brad that made him laugh and stare in my direction. Right then, I knew my peaceful days were numbered. The trouble started small, like it always does. A week after they moved in, I was out of my bee suit doing the morning inspection when I heard Brad's truck fire up. That thing sounded like a diesel locomotive having a bad day, all rumble and roar designed to announce his presence to the world. I was checking hive number 7 when the noise got closer. Too close. I looked up just in time to see Brad's monster truck swing wide around the corner, cutting right across the edge of my front lawn. His oversized tires left deep gouges in the grass I'd spent 2 seasons nursing back to health after the drought. The bees sensed my agitation and started buzzing louder. These girls could read my mood better than any therapist ever could. I pulled off my veil and watched Brad's truck disappear down Maple Avenue, leaving tire tracks like scars across my property. Son of a gun, I muttered, walking over to examine the damage. The ruts were 6 inches deep in places, and clumps of torn sod lay scattered like casualties. It would take weeks to repair this mess, assuming I could even get grass to grow in Nebraska clay that had been compacted by 3 tons of testosterone and steel. I told myself it was an accident. New neighborhood. Maybe he misjudged the turn. Happens to everyone, right? But something in my gut said otherwise. The way Brittany had looked at me that first day, the whispered conversation with Brad, this felt intentional. Over the next few days, I kept an eye out whenever I heard that truck. Sure enough, every time Brad left their driveway, he'd swing wide and clip my lawn. Not by much, just enough to tear up the grass and remind me he was there. Each morning brought fresh damage, fresh reminders that my peace was over. Mrs. Patterson noticed it too. "That new fellow's got a heavy foot," she said one afternoon while we chatted over the fence. "Shame about your grass, Winston. You've worked so hard on it." I nodded, jaw tight. "Accidents happen, I suppose." But she gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it any more than I was. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning. I was loading honey jars into my truck for the farmer's market when Brad's diesel beast came rumbling around the corner. This time, instead of just clipping the edge, he aimed straight for my wildflower patch, the carefully cultivated meadow where my bees gathered their nectar. The truck plowed through my lavender plants, crushing stems and scattering purple blooms across the yard. My sunflowers, planted in perfect rows to guide the bees home, were flattened like they'd been hit by a tornado. Years of work, destroyed in seconds. I dropped the honey jar I was holding. It shattered on the driveway, golden sweetness spreading across the concrete like liquid sunshine. The bees, sensing catastrophe, poured out of their hives in an angry cloud. Brad didn't even slow down, just kept driving, windows down, country music blaring. That's when I knew this wasn't about bad driving or tight corners. This was war. I'm not a man who rushes into confrontation. 30 years of beekeeping teaches you patience, planning, and the wisdom of staying calm under pressure. But watching my livelihood get destroyed piece by piece was testing every ounce of self-control I'd learned. After Brad flattened my sunflowers, I knew I had to do something. Couldn't let this slide anymore. So I walked across the street, knocked on their door, and waited. Brittany answered, wearing that same smug expression she perfected during our divorce proceedings. "Well, if it isn't the bee whisperer," she said, not inviting me in. "We need to talk about your husband's driving," I said, keeping my voice steady. "He's been tearing up my property." She laughed, that sharp sound I remembered too well. "Oh, Winston, always so dramatic about your little flowers. Those flowers feed my bees. My bees produce the honey that pays my bills. This isn't just about pretty petals." Brad appeared behind her then, filling the doorway like a mountain of muscle and attitude. "Problem here," he growled, looking me up and down like I was something he'd scrape off his boot. "Your truck keeps damaging my garden," I said, meeting his glare. "I'd appreciate it if you'd be more careful around my property." Brad stepped forward, using his size to intimidate. "Listen here, bug boy. This is a public street. I'll drive however I want." "The street's public," I replied, not backing down despite the 6-inch height difference. "My yard isn't." Brittany laughed again. "Oh, come on, Winston. Men will be men. Brad's a real man who doesn't tiptoe around like he's walking on eggshells." That phrase hit me like a slap. A real man. The same thing she'd thrown at me during the divorce, comparing me to whatever fantasy she'd built in her head. "A real man respects other people's property," I said. Brad's face darkened. "You calling me fake? I'm asking you to drive more carefully." He leaned closer, his breath hot on my face. "And I'm telling you to mind your own business. Maybe if you weren't so worried about your precious flowers, you'd understand how the real world works." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. The real world includes basic courtesy and property rights. Brittany stepped between us, but not to defuse the situation. "Winston, you always were such a delicate little thing. Maybe you should find a hobby that doesn't involve such fragile plants." I looked at both of them, these people who'd once meant something to me, and realized I was talking to strangers. Worse than strangers, enemies who enjoyed my pain. "Just stay off my land," I said finally, and turned to walk away. Behind me, I heard Brad's booming laughter. "No promises, B-boy." As I walked back to my house, their mockery echoing across the street, I knew things were about to get much worse. But I also knew something they didn't. Sometimes the quietest people have the strongest bite. Brad made good on his threat the very next morning. I was out checking the hives at dawn when I heard his truck start up. By now, I recognized the sound like a rancher knows his cattle, that particular diesel rumble that meant trouble was coming. This time, he didn't even pretend it was an accident. Brad aimed that monster truck straight through my bee yard, crushing 2 of my smaller hives and scattering the wooden frames across the ground. Thousands of angry bees poured into the morning air, their home destroyed, their honey stolen by the earth. I stood there in my bee suit, watching 2 years of careful colony building reduced to splinters and chaos. The financial loss was devastating. Those hives represented nearly $1,000 in equipment and months of work nurturing the colonies. But the emotional impact cut deeper. These weren't just insects to me. They were partners in a dance as old as civilization itself. Brad didn't stop there. His truck plowed through my remaining flower beds, destroying the last of my lavender and crushing the herb garden I'd planted for specialty honey flavors. Mud flew everywhere, coating my workshop windows and splattering across my house, siding like some kind of biological warfare. When the destruction finally stopped, Brad rolled down his window and shouted, "Oops, guess I need to work on my driving." Then he gunned the engine and disappeared down Maple Avenue, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my life's work. The surviving bees were in chaos, swarming angrily around their destroyed homes. I spent the next 3 hours in the blazing Nebraska sun, gathering scattered frames, salvaging what honey I could, and trying to rehome the displaced colonies. My hands shook as I worked, not from fear, but from rage, so pure it felt like molten metal in my veins. Mrs. Patterson came over around noon with a pitcher of iced tea and a look of outrage that matched my own. "Winston, this has gone too far. That man's a menace." "Yeah," I said, wiping sweat and dirt from my face. "He is. You should call the police." I looked at the mess around me. Tire tracks in soft earth, broken wood, scattered bees. And tell them what? That my neighbor's a bad driver? They'd laugh me off the phone. This isn't bad driving. This is deliberate. She was right, of course. But proving deliberate malice versus careless stupidity would be nearly impossible. Brad was careful to make each incident look accidental, and Brittany would back up whatever story he told. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a beer and surveyed the damage. My once pristine bee yard looked like a war zone. The financial hit would set me back months, maybe longer. Henderson's Diner was expecting their weekly honey delivery, and I had nothing to give them. But as I sat there watching the sunset paint the Nebraska sky gold and crimson, I felt something shift inside me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something harder and more focused. Brad thought he could break me by destroying my bees and flowers. He thought I'd crumble like the soft city boy Brittany had always claimed I was. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. I woke up that Saturday morning feeling like maybe, just maybe, I could start rebuilding. The destroyed hives were a setback, but I'd ordered replacement equipment and found a supplier willing to sell me 2 established colonies. It would cost me most of my emergency fund, but my girls needed homes. I stepped outside with my morning coffee, planning to survey the area and figure out where to position the new hives for maximum safety. What I found instead made my blood turn to ice water. My entire bee yard was gone, not damaged, obliterated. Every single hive had been crushed flat, wooden frames scattered like kindling across the yard. The workshop I'd built with my own hands was nothing but splinters and twisted metal roofing. My honey processing equipment lay mangled in the dirt, thousands of dollars of specialized tools reduced to scrap. But it was the fence that told the real story. My white picket fence, the barrier I'd built to protect my life's work, was kicked down in sections. Boot prints in the mud showed where someone had systematically destroyed each panel, stomping the boards until they split and broke. I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the porch steps, but I barely heard it over the roaring in my ears. This wasn't vehicle damage anymore. This was deliberate, calculated destruction carried out on foot, in the dark, while I slept. Tire tracks crisscrossed the entire yard, deep gouges that turned my once pristine bee sanctuary into a muddy wasteland. But these weren't random tracks from reckless driving. They formed a pattern, methodical and thorough, like someone had taken their time to ensure maximum devastation. I stood there in my pajamas and bare feet, surveying the ruins of everything I'd built since the divorce. 3 years of work gone. My livelihood destroyed. My future uncertain. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her fence, gasping when she saw the destruction. "Winston, oh my God, what happened?" "Brad happened," I said, my voice coming out flat and dead. "This is beyond vandalism. This is evil." She was right. This level of destruction took planning, effort, and a complete lack of human decency. Brad hadn't just damaged my property. He'd tried to destroy my ability to earn a living. I walked through the wreckage of my bare feet, glass and splinters cutting into my soles, but I didn't feel the pain. All I felt was a cold, calculating rage settling in my chest like winter frost. My phone rang. Henderson's Diner, probably calling about their weekly honey order. I let go to voicemail. What was I supposed to tell them? That my business was finished? That their supplier had been crushed under the wheels of a madman's truck? But as I stood there among the ruins, something shifted inside me. The shock faded, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Brad thought he'd broken me. He thought I'd crawl away defeated, another victim of his twisted games. He was wrong. I wasn't the same soft man Brittany had divorced 3 years ago. Beekeeping had taught me patience, but it had also taught me about protecting what's mine. And sometimes, when a hive is under attack, the only response is to swarm. Brad wanted a war. He was about to get one. I didn't call the police. What was the point? Brad would claim he knew nothing about it, and without witnesses or security cameras, I had no proof. Instead, I called the one person I knew who understood both my situation and my need for justice. Tommy Tank. Morrison had been my squad leader in the National Guard 15 years ago. These days, he ran a small security and electronics business out of Omaha, specializing in farm protection systems. If anyone could help me level the playing field, it was Tank. Winston, his voice boomed through the phone. Haven't heard from you since the reunion. What's going on? I explained the situation, the harassment, the property damage, and now the total destruction of my bee operation. Tank listened without interrupting, occasionally grunting in the way soldiers do when they're processing tactical information. So you need to catch this piece of work in the act, he said when I finished. And you want him to regret ever messing with you. Something like that. I've got just the thing. Give me your address. I'll be there tonight. Tank arrived after dark in an unmarked van, looking exactly like the compact, dangerous man I remembered from our guard days. He put on maybe 10 pounds in 15 years, all of it muscle, and his handshake could still crush walnuts. Show me the battlefield, he said, surveying my destroyed yard with a professional eye. We walked the perimeter while Tank took measurements and notes. He examined the tire tracks, the boot prints, and the patterns of destruction with the methodical attention of a crime scene investigator. This wasn't random, he concluded. Your boy took his time, had a plan. Probably spent an hour or more out here, making sure he got everything. Can you help me catch him? Tank grinned, the same predatory smile I'd seen before our most challenging training exercises. Brother, I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to make sure he never wants to set foot on your property again. He unloaded equipment from his van, motion sensors, night vision cameras, and something that looked like a small black box with wires attached. Perimeter defense system, he explained, holding up the box. Motion activated. Won't hurt him permanently, but it'll damn sure get his attention. What does it do? Delivers a low-voltage shock through buried cables. Farmers use them to keep livestock contained. Legal, non-lethal, but memorable. We spent the next 3 hours setting up the system. Tank buried sensor cables along the property line and positioned cameras with night vision capabilities. The shock grid went in strategic locations where Brad was most likely to step. Motion sprinklers too, Tank said, installing compact units behind my damaged fence posts. Freezing water at high pressure. Won't cause permanent damage, but it'll sure ruin his night. The final touch was an audio system, speakers hidden around the yard, wire to play a sound file Tank had engineered himself. What's that going to do? I asked. He played a sample through his phone. The sound was indescribable, part air raid siren, part animal scream, and part mechanical shriek. It was loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood, and terrifying enough to make grown men question their life choices. Psychological warfare, Tank explained. Sometimes the best defense is making your enemy think twice about attacking. By 3 a.m., we had turned my destroyed bee yard into a fortress. Everything was connected to Tank's monitoring system, which would alert both our phones the moment anything triggered the sensors. Now we wait, Tank said, packing up his tools. And when your boy comes back, and he will come back, we'll be ready for him. I thanked Tank and watched him drive away into the Nebraska darkness. For the first time since the destruction, I felt something resembling hope. Brad thought he'd won. He thought he destroyed everything I cared about and left me helpless. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. I didn't have to wait long. Brad's arrogance was his weakness, He couldn't resist coming back to admire his handiwork. It was 2:30 a.m. when my phone buzzed with Tank's alert. Motion detected. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my robe, and crept to the front window. Through the darkness, I could see a massive silhouette moving through my destroyed yard. Brad was back, all right. And he wasn't alone. Brittany was with him, both of them laughing as they surveyed the devastation from Friday night. She was pointing at different areas, probably suggesting improvements to their destruction. The sight of her enjoying my misery made my jaw clench. "Look at this mess," I heard Brittany say, her voice carrying in the still night air. "Poor little Winston must be heartbroken." Brad chuckled. Maybe now he'll get a real job instead of playing with bugs all day. They were being casual, careless, walking right into Tank's carefully laid traps. I watched Brad step directly onto the buried shot grid. The first zap lit him up like a Christmas tree. He yelped, a high-pitched sound that didn't match his tough guy image, and jumped backward, straight into Brittany. She shrieked as the motion sprinklers kicked in, dousing both of them with ice-cold water. But Tank's masterpiece was the audio system. The ungodly sound that erupted from the hidden speakers was like nothing from this world. Part demon, part air raid siren, part screaming banshee. It was loud enough to rattle windows and wake the dead. Brad stumbled backward, soaking wet and wide-eyed with panic. "What the hell is that?" he shouted over the noise. Brittany was dancing around like her feet were on fire, water streaming from her hair, looking nothing like the composed woman who'd tormented me earlier. When she stepped on another shock cable, she screamed loud enough to compete with Tank's audio system. "Winston!" she shrieked. "Winston, what did you do?" I stepped onto my front porch, coffee mug in hand, looking like I'd just been awakened by the commotion. "Problems?" I called out, keeping my voice level. Brad was trying to back toward the street, but every step seemed to trigger another shock or spray of water. His tough guy swagger was gone, replaced by genuine fear as the demonic howling continued. "Turn it off," he yelled. "Turn off whatever this is." "Turn off what?" I replied innocently. I just heard screaming and came to check if everything was okay. Brittany finally made it to the sidewalk, her clothes plastered to her body, makeup running down her face in black streaks. She looked like she'd been through a car wash during a thunderstorm. "This is insane," she screamed. "We're calling the police." "Please do," I said calmly. "I've got security footage of you two trespassing on my property. The officers might find that interesting." Brad's face went slack as the implications hit him. He'd been caught red-handed, on camera, on my property in the middle of the night. No amount of accidental driving excuses would explain this. When my ex-wife saw what I'd done, she nearly fainted. Her face went white as fresh snow, and she grabbed Brad's arm to keep from falling. The night had just begun. The police arrived within 10 minutes, probably drawn by the ungodly noise Tank's system was making. I'd managed to shut off the audio by then, but the motion sensors were still active, keeping Brad and Brittany trapped on the sidewalk like refugees from their own stupidity. Officer Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, took one look at the scene and shook her head. "Somebody want to explain what's going on here?" "These two were trespassing on my property," I said, holding up my phone with Tank's monitoring app. "I've got video evidence." "That's not trespassing," Brad protested, water still dripping from his clothes. "We were just checking on the neighborhood." At 2:30 in the morning. Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "On someone else's private property." I showed her the footage on my phone, clear video of Brad and Brittany walking through my yard, laughing about the destruction, stepping on areas clearly marked as private property. "This is harassment." Brittany sputtered. "He set up some kind of torture device." "Motion-activated sprinklers and security lighting," I corrected. "Perfectly legal property protection systems." "Officer, these are the same people who've been vandalizing my bee operation for weeks." Martinez examined the evidence while Brad and Brittany stood shivering in their wet clothes. The more she saw, the less sympathetic she became to their complaints. "Mr. Wolfe, you have a right to protect your property with non-lethal deterrent systems," she said finally. "Mr. Dalton, Mrs. Foster, you're both under arrest for criminal trespassing." "This is ridiculous," Brad shouted as Martinez produced handcuffs. "We weren't doing anything wrong. Walking on someone's private property at 2:30 a.m. after weeks of documented harassment, that's something wrong in my book." I watched with satisfaction as they loaded Brad into the back of the patrol car. Brittany was still protesting her innocence, but the video evidence was overwhelming. Tank system had worked perfectly, not only catching them in the act, but creating a record that would hold up in court. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer," Brittany called through the car window as they drove away. "Looking forward to it," I replied. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her fence in her bathrobe, having been awakened by the commotion. "Winston, what happened?" "Justice," I said simply. "Finally, justice." The next morning, I called Tank to thank him for the system. "Worked like a charm," I told him. "Caught them red-handed." "Good," Tank replied. "Bullies like that only understand one language: consequences. You just taught them a valuable lesson." I spent the day fielding calls from neighbors who'd heard about the night's excitement. Word traveled fast in small towns, and by noon, half of Cedar Falls knew that Brittany and Brad had been arrested for trespassing. Henderson's diner called too. "Winston, heard you had some trouble with vandals," the owner said. "Don't worry about the honey delivery this week. Take care of your business first." That evening, I sat on my front porch with a beer, looking at my destroyed yard. The physical damage was still there, but something had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. Brad and Brittany had thought they could break me. Instead, they just made me stronger. The aftermath of Brad and Brittany's arrest brought changes I never expected. Word of their midnight humiliation spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire, and suddenly I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the guy who'd stood up to the neighborhood bullies and won. 3 days after the arrest, I was surprised by a knock on my door. A teenager stood on my porch, maybe 16, with Brad's dark hair, but none of his swagger. This had to be Kyle, Brittany's son from her first marriage. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, shifting nervously. "I'm Kyle. I wanted to apologize for what my mom and Brad did." I studied the kid's face, earnest, embarrassed, nothing like the parents who tormented me. "You don't need to apologize for their choices, son." "Yeah, I do," he said firmly. "I heard them planning it. The whole thing, destroying your yard, coming back to gloat about it. I should have said something, but..." He shrugged helplessly. "But they wouldn't have listened anyway," I finished. "Brad's been bragging about it for weeks. Said you were weak, that real men don't play with bugs." Kyle's jaw tightened. My real dad taught me that real men take responsibility for their actions. The kid had spine, more than his mother or stepfather, that was certain. "I brought you something," Kyle continued, pulling a small potted plant from behind his back. "It's lavender. I know your bees like it, and I thought, maybe it could be a start." I took the pot, feeling an unexpected warmth in my chest. After weeks of hatred and destruction, this simple gesture of decency meant more than the kid could know. "Thank you, Kyle. That means a lot. Mom's still furious about the arrest," he said. "She's talking about lawyers and lawsuits. But Brad's different now. Quieter. I think you scared him." "Good," I thought. Fear was a language bullies understood. "They're moving," Kyle added. "House goes on the market next week. Brad says he can't stand living across from a psycho who booby-traps his yard." I almost smiled at that. Tank's security system had accomplished more than just catching them. It had driven them away entirely. After Kyle left, I sat on my porch with his lavender plant, thinking about how strange life could be. The people who should have supported me had tried to destroy me, while a kid I barely knew had shown more decency than his own parents. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her fence later that evening. "Heard they're moving," she said with satisfaction. "So I'm told. Good riddance. Though I'll miss watching you handle them. You showed real backbone, Winston." That night, I planted Kyle's lavender in a spot where the morning sun would hit it just right. It wasn't much, one small plant in a yard full of destruction, but it was a beginning. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's just outlasting the people trying to break you. 6 months later, my bee yard was not only rebuilt, it was better than before. The insurance money, combined with the settlement from Brad and Brittany's criminal conviction, had allowed me to expand in ways I'd never imagined. 12 new hives hummed with activity, arranged in perfect rows surrounded by the most beautiful wildflower meadow Nebraska had ever seen. I'd added a proper workshop with climate control and professional honey processing equipment. A new white fence, taller and stronger than before, protected everything I'd built. But the best addition wasn't something I planned. "Mr. Wolfe, hive number 6 is ready for harvest," Kyle called from across the yard. The kid had become my unofficial apprentice, showing up every weekend to help with the bees. Turned out he had a natural gift for it. Calm, patient, respectful of the hives. After his mother and Brad moved to the other side of town, Khaled asked if he could keep visiting. Said he'd learned more about being a man from watching me handle the crisis than he'd learned from Brad in 2 years of marriage. Careful with the frames, I reminded him as we worked together in the late afternoon sun. These girls have been working hard. Kyle nodded, handling the honeycomb with the reverence of someone who understood the miracle of what bees created. His stepfather had called it playing with bugs, but Kyle saw it for what it was: partnership with nature, patience rewarded, creation instead of destruction. Henderson's Diner had expanded their order, now taking 20 jars of honey per week for their famous rolls and desserts. Word of mouth had brought new customers from 3 counties over, all wanting to buy honey from the guy who stood up to those bullies. Tank stopped by that evening, admiring the rebuilt operation. "Looks good, Winston. Better than before." "Feels better too," I said, watching Kyle carefully return a frame to the hive. Having help makes all the difference. That kid's got good instincts. Reminds me of you at that age. Quiet strength. Knows right from wrong. As the sun set over the Nebraska plains, I sat on my porch with a cold beer and surveyed my little kingdom. The bees were settling in for the night. The flowers swayed in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear Kyle's laughter as he told Mrs. Patterson about his first successful honey harvest. Brad and Brittany had tried to destroy me, thinking I was weak because I chose creation over destruction, partnership over domination. They'd learned the hard way that quiet strength runs deeper than loud swagger. My phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. "Thanks for teaching me what real men do, Mr. Wolfe. See you Saturday." I smiled, typing back, "See you Saturday, son." Sometimes the best victories aren't the ones you win for yourself. Sometimes they're the ones you win for the next generation, showing them that dignity and perseverance always outlast bullying and bluster. The bees hummed their approval as darkness settled over Cedar Falls, and for the first time in years, everything felt exactly as it should be.